Okay, I am your host, Ryan Brown. Welcome to Facsimile, where you will be a coffee taster if you are a serious coffee enthusiast. Cuppers, please get your samples ready. You're in for a treat today. You're going to get a lot more out of this, though, if you have Facsimile samples in front of you so that you can cup them along with us. You can find a subscribe button below. And in Facsimile, you improve your coffee tasting skills, you calibrate your scores with experts, and gain insights about origins, processing, and samples. Every month, we send you samples to taste along with us, along with myself and coffee experts such as Charles Babinski. Hello, Charles.
Hello, happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Charles has spent the better part of 20 years in the specialty coffee industry as a barista competitor, trainer, roaster, buyer, and customer experience innovator. In 2012, Charles opened what seemed like a modest pop-up cafe in Los Angeles, Glanville and Babinski, growing it into the iconic Go Get 'Em Tiger over the ensuing years. Charles is your 2015 US Barista Champion and World Barista Champion runner-up. Charles, you left Go Get 'Em Tiger earlier this year, and you're living in New York City with your wife and your daughter.
This is true. Living, it's a beautiful life here in Brooklyn. Enjoying it very much.
It's so nice to have you here with us today. I can't wait to cup these with you.
Yeah, really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
And one other comment, Scott Rayo is in the YouTube chat room. We're going to be doing questions again with myself and Charles and Scott at the end of this time, after we finish cupping these samples. Please pipe up with your questions, your comments, your thoughts that you would like us to answer or to comment on, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. Sound good? Charles, are you ready to cup?
I'm ready to cup.
Okay, cool. Charles, I know you already ground your samples. I haven't. I'm going to get my water going though, just so, because that can take a while. And just briefly inventory what I have in front of me. I have Facsimile samples 1, 2, 3, and 4 from my left to right. I have a scale. I'm using 10 grams of coffee in each of these bowls. I'm going to use 170 grams of water, as close as I can get with a gram scale. I have a couple of rinse bowls. I have 2 cupping spoons, one to taste with and one to help the other spoon clean these off after we break. I have a grinder. I have water. I'm using third wave water and distilled water. I'm going to bring these up to, let's say, 200 degrees Fahrenheit and pour them. And I'm in California. I'm not at elevation, so it's new for me to not be pouring boiling water immediately. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and grind these. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. All right. Start my water. Ryan, since I have already ground, is there anything that I can talk about or discuss during this time?
One thing that I was thinking about is that you sent me a score sheet
Mhm.
that you have used, and I think that we could start discussing that. You could
Okay.
talk a little bit about where it was developed, as far as you know, and just start talking about it before we start discussing the fragrance and aroma of these samples.
Yeah, absolutely. So the score sheet that I shared with you was the score sheet that we used at Go Get 'em Tiger for certain uses. I think in general, most score sheets functionally serve as teaching tools to sort of help people learn what to focus on or what we valued. This was meant to, I think the original intention was to have it be something that would be our kind of our standard, qualitative scoring for coffee. And we found it being more useful as a teaching tool in the grand scheme of things. The idea for the sheet came from, I was seeing the way that Ben Kaminsky, when he was at Ritual, was cupping and the way that he was keeping scores. And he was doing something similar. And I got inspiration from that, specifically focusing in on sweetness, acidity, and what I'm referring to as structure, which is basically everything else, as well as just having a kind of like a focus on what the reason it is that we were cupping. Now at Go Get 'em Tiger, we started out as a multi-roaster. We switched over to being to roasting our own. And when this was developed, we were a multi-roaster. And ultimately, the reason why we were cupping was because we were trying to find coffees to serve in our shots. And ultimately, every single coffee that we had to answer the question, like, would we serve this in a shot? So if you look at the sheet on the bottom right of each thing, it just says, would you serve this? It's a binary. Ultimately, it's the only important thing on the sheet as far as its functioning. And I think it's incredibly important that the way that you cup line up with the reason why you're cupping. I think a lot of people get this, especially when they're first starting. I think a lot of people lose focus on what the specific goal of that cupping is and try to like take in as much information or find the most forward descriptors or do something that's more self-affirming. But like ultimately, if you're cupping in a professional capacity, you're cupping for a reason. Those reasons can be incredibly varied. And because of that, like the way that you'll approach the coffees can be very different as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're definitely going to talk more about this. And this I did send this to Facsimile cuppers via email a couple times over the past 10 days. If you have it, if you don't have it, I would recommend you go find that email from Ryan at Facsimile and print it out if you can print it out. Otherwise, if you can take a close look at it on your phone or other device and maybe get an idea of how we're going to be talking about this. So would I capture fragrance notes in the notes section underneath each of the samples?
So for fragrance notes, you can put it in the notes section. What I usually do for fragrance is I do it just to the left of the boxes. And I have a kind of very simple system where I draw a line. And if I get any notes like that are pleasant notes, I write those notes above the line. If I get notes that are negative notes, I write them below the line. And if I can't find specific notes, but I'm only responding to intensity, I just draw smaller dashes above or below the line.
So this is just in the margin, essentially, the left-hand margin.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So we're going to break the rules here. Charles and I will be openly discussing what we're smelling as we're going through these 4 samples. So let's go ahead with that.
Cool.
Charles, please feel free to just think out loud as you're smelling these.
Yeah, I'd say like moderate intensity, kind of a light citrus quality. I mean, I'm getting fruit, but I'm not picking up on it right now. So I would just write light citrus over the line.
Okay, yeah, and so on number 1, I smelled a little bit of butter and a little bit of like a Dutch cocoa.
Okay.
Number 2. What do you smell in number 2, Charles?
Light vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it.
Yeah, I definitely get that vanilla. A little bit of a stone fruit quality.
Mm-hmm.
What about 3?
It's a little bit more intense than the other ones. I'm getting something that is not like, it borders on being kind of anise-like. It's also slightly, there's like a slight savory fruit quality to it that is not in the realm of being savory, but just like it has that dimension to it. It's definitely more intense than the other 2 for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. That savory quality, I often will describe what I'm smelling as being like a bergamot or a black currant, or in that area of sweet citrus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
4.
Something a little bit like herbal tea. I'm getting like a slight kind of like paperish quality.
Oh, really? Okay, that's a negative.
Yeah, but it's kind of like, I think like with the negatives, like I would say 50% of the negatives don't go through the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is like, it's not like you sort of like accumulate dings. I think with at least the way that I've always approached cupping, or I've gotten the most out of it, is you write, you sort of take notes to be able to make an informed decision about the coffee when the time comes.
Yeah.
And you don't like accumulate everything that you experienced. So like if I get that paperiness in the wet aroma and the, you know, all of the passes, then that's one thing. But if this is the only time that I sense a little bit of something, it probably either wasn't there or it's so minor that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and we'll see as we continue. Yeah, definitely something like a chamomile.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly some tangy, like a more tangy type of fruit in there. I was getting a fair amount of caramel in both 3 and 4.
Yeah, yeah.
How's your water doing?
My water's ready to go.
Okay, cool. Me too.
Awesome.
Me too. So I have 10 grams of coffee. I'm gonna pour 170 grams of water in each of these. And I have this giant timer now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty, well, we'll see. We'll see if it works as I start there.
All right, good to go.
Is it working? It is. You're pouring 2 right now?
Yes, sir.
Perfect.
So here's a question, Ryan. Do you take the wet evaluation just on the break, or do you smell it before?
I smell it before too.
Great.
How about you?
Yeah, I smell it before as well.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I get radically different results from each of those.
Yeah.
I will say that the majority of the flavor notes from a coffee I get from the fragrance and aroma.
I think you are a much better smeller than I am.
What about you? I'm guessing that's not the case for you.
It kind of depends quite a bit. I always, like, in the back of my head as this like ideal, I always imagine that if I'm doing things right, and this is complete BS, so please don't follow this, but I always think that if I'm doing things right and like the stars are aligned, then I will be able to unlock the mysteries of the coffee solely through the wet aroma. And I always, like, that's like the thing that sort of I'm thinking about whenever I'm doing it, it doesn't happen that way. You know, usually the descriptors and the thoughts that I get from it are pretty vague. Sometimes it can be a good place to pick up on specific roast characteristics that I might lose in some other part of it. But, you know, like I have heard from people who have the same experience as you, and that is what I strive for.
Part of my shorthand typically when I take notes is to, if I smell something, so when I approach each cup, I'm not looking at what I previously smelled or experienced. I taste it without knowing. If I smell, you know, stone fruit, and I go to write stone fruit down and I see that I already wrote stone fruit down last time, instead of writing it again, I'll circle it. And that's my way of kind of saying, really, this was really there. So that's something that helps me. And also just in general, shorthand is nice when you're cupping, because a lot of the things that you experience over and over and over again.
Yeah, that is completely true.
So would you typically, for break or I'm going to smell these before I break in about a minute. Would you typically put notes in a similar area over there in the left-hand column?
When I do the break, I'm just reinforcing the notes from smelling it previously. But yeah, I do it right under. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely getting that butter in one again. I'd love to know if you are smelling right now what.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting the same kind of like, if there's like a very sort of clean citrus, it's not super like complex, and something that's like slightly raisiny, I can 100% see butter.
I'm getting more fruit in two, as well as some dark chocolate.
Yes, two reminds me a lot of like, if you get like a really kind of like complex raisiny chocolate from Colombia or Ecuador.
Let's break these.
Cool.
And yeah, please just feel free to tell me what you're smelling.
Okay, on the break, that was way more floral than I experienced in any of the other things. Making a note, it was pretty high intensity. Too raisiny.
Two is raisiny. I agree with that. That's exactly what I smelled into.
Three, I'm getting like a lot of like those slightly savory characteristics. I mean, you could read it as like something caramelized, slightly roasty, interacting with the fruit qualities.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cooked berry or cooked stone fruit.
For herbal tea, hibiscus, these like light herbal flavors, I'm definitely like there's like a risk when you're cupping of assuming that you know what a coffee is, and you can write like 75% of the time and look like an idiot the other 25% of the time. And I'm at risk on the last one for doing that.
So as we skim these, I would love to go back to your score sheet here. So you mentioned, so we've talked quite a bit about sweetness and acidity here. You said structure is everything else. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so realistically, like I'd say that most of the places where I have worked have bought for sweetness, and sweetness tends to be the most, the biggest focus. Acidity obviously has a very, kind of like, I don't know, mutual connection or good connection to sweetness, and they work together to create complexity. Structure is literally just a catch-all for everything else. Aromatics, the sort of like the way that it evolves, the complexity of how the flavors evolve on the tongue. I think that aroma and clarity in the cup are the two biggest factors for me of what I would describe as structure. Things like defects, flavors being disjointed, having like a finish that's like dramatically different than the rest of the flavor would all come through in structure. as well. But the idea is that for each one of these, there is something specific that you can point to justify the score, right? Or as specific as you can get. So this is like a learning tool. And, you know, for those, is it all right to go through them right now? Is now a good time?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for sweetness, right, 5 is the baseline. And anything below a 5, like realistically, it doesn't really matter if it's a 2 or a 4. Like you probably shouldn't be tasting coffees that score below there. And I wouldn't worry too much about getting the scores right in that area. So 5 is the baseline. If there is sweetness present, that's a 5.
So it's binary. It's on, it is or it is not sweet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the best pieces of advice that anybody ever gave me when I first started cupping was to just think about that. I think it was Jeff Watts at Intelligentsia, who's somebody who I respect and have learned a lot from through the years. And his point was like, is it sweet, right? Do you taste sweetness? And if you taste sweetness, like number one, we're all lucky. That's a wonderful thing. It takes an incredible amount of work to make a coffee where there's even just like a baseline of sweetness, and having respect for that work is really important. And, you know, if it's also the hallmark of what we do in specialty coffee, you know, having or sharing these coffees that have this level of complexity throughout the whole process, that you would be able to get something as kind of interesting and intricate as complex sweetness or sweetness in the cup when you're drinking it. So like, that's always a wonderful thing. But yes, for the most part, a binary. So if there's any sweetness present, that's a 5. A 6 would be sweetness that you could describe in a specific way. This is dark chocolate sweetness. This is, you know, citrus fruit sweetness. 7 would be complex sweetness, right? Sweetness that has enough dimension to feel, you know, more akin to what it is that you're describing it as. And 8 would be complex sweetness that lingers and evolves on the palate. And anytime that I taste a coffee that has that, that's like an exceptional coffee. And, you know, that's maybe like 20 or 30 coffees a year overall. 9 is what you give to coffees that are way better than that, and you don't know how to handle it. And 10, ideal that is never attained.
Yeah. Have you ever given a 10 on sweetness?
No, but I've given like 9.5s, 9.5s. But like at that point, it's like the difference between like, you know, this is, I mean, we can kind of talk about the classic score for cupping, right? The 85, 86, 87. I feel somewhat similarly with like people scoring 95 and 96, which is that the difference between a 90-point coffee and a 95-point coffee, like it's just like different levels of being like orgasmically elated. Like you don't get to taste those coffees that often, and it's really such a wonderful thing. And like you're better off just appreciating it than trying to quantify it in some way.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, that there's no one who scores a coffee at 95 would be surprised that someone else scored it a 93 or a 97. But that same flexibility doesn't exist at lower scores, and that is usually the opposite of how that would work.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's out of 10. 5 is kind of a baseline. If it's below that, it's not super concerning because it's not going to be for at least for the sake of this scoring sheet, not going to be purchased.
None of these coffees should score below a 6, right?
Right.
Like that would be surprising.
Yeah. So keep going with the scoring.
So for acidity, right? 5 is the presence of acidity, right? 6 is having that acidity have some like characteristic where you could put it into a different category, tartaric, citric, malic. 7 would be having complex acidity that is like actively adding complexity to the sweetness, if that makes sense, like they're working together. And then 8 is when that acidity is like, I said that these were all like completely concrete things that you could ascribe to numbers, but this one is a little bit vague. But I always think of it as like exceptional acidity, and 8 is exceptional. Exceptional acidity in a cup of coffee is like the neon in a sign, right? Where the sweetness is sort of like that's the shape of it, but the acidity like just makes it so bright and so lasting and so clear that it takes it to another level. And when I'm experiencing that, that's 8 and above.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Great.
For structure, 5 would be basically like any defects or unpleasant qualities are going to act as demerits. Pleasant qualities and a general kind of like a general togetherness of the way that the sweetness and the acidity work together will act as things to bump up the score. So an 8 would have like complex aromatic qualities that are distinct from the sweetness and the distinct from the flavor, and that's pretty rare overall. And 7 would be something where the sweetness and the acidity work really well together. It's completely free of defect, and there's just like a vibrancy and an evolution to the flavor that is distinct.
Perfect. And then how do you use these defect boxes?
Oh, I think, so we did the scoring with the idea that it would generate a score at the end, right? And that score would be meaningful to us in the decisions that we made. Realistically, none of them were. Like ultimately the thing that was meaningful was the, would you serve this? Yeah. So previously we would take a number to try to like quantify what how defective it was on like a scale of 10. But realistically, it's just a place to put defect. And I think it's like I think it is a good exercise to try to be as specific about that as possible, because at least in my experience, most of the time when I refer to a defect, I'm wrong, or I'm like missing something, or there's like some context that I don't have. And I've always found it helpful to talk about it explicitly so that people can sort of like, people who know more than me can set me right. And
sure.
Versus having it be something that you sort of like vaguely work into your other observations about the coffee.
Yeah, okay.
And then the plus is where we would put notes about things that we feel are coming from us and not from the coffee necessarily. You know, this is a style of coffee that I really love, right? Like wonderful Yirgacheffe. Now, I think that this sheet works as a good tool for getting people to focus on sweetness, getting people to focus on acidity, getting people to practice describing those things. I would say that it works as well as a blank sheet of paper for being able to make decisions about what coffees you're going to buy.
Okay. Okay. So you're doing a 10-point scale for sweetness, acidity, structure on that plus box. Is that also a 10-point box?
Yeah.
And then defect is potentially
is a negative. Yeah. So it's 0 to 10, but 1 is a positive and 1's a negative, right? So one would remove points from the final score. 1 would add points to the final score.
So do you end up with a 50-point score, 0 to 50-point score?
They 3x the first 3 boxes 3x, so it's a 100-point scale.
Okay.
90 plus 10 minus 10 or minus 0.
Right. I see. Okay. Great. I'm excited for this. And then one other box that you haven't discussed is classic.
Oh yeah, we would that was our internal use of the 80 to 90-point scale. And the way that we taught the scale was as basically a 10-point scale, which is what I think it functionally works as in most places, right?
Yeah.
Like unless people are actively taking a bunch of other boxes and using that to get a score, they're just pulling a number, out of their minds. And I'd say like most people end up having 80 be the baseline for specialty, somewhere around 85 or 85.5 being the baseline for like clean, exceptional specialty, and 90 being the point at which the coffees have just ascended to another sort of like level of being.
Got it. Charles, one little snafu is I dropped 1 drop of water on the remote for this timer and it now says 99.59. So just looking at the time, I can tell that we should get into them. I was planning on around 18 minutes. And as we do, let's just talk through how you would score this. I think that would be the best thing is for us to hear how you would use this score sheet.
Yeah, actually, give me 1 second. I need to go grab a spittoon.
Absolutely. So I'm sticking to number one, and we'll just kind of, if it's all right with you, just walk through entirely how you might score that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to do 3 passes in general. First pass, I'm mostly just trying to get the juices flowing. Like I try to keep myself to 2 tastes per cup, just because more focus doesn't tend to help myself at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm usually writing like very simple descriptors. If I can't, so something that I find really helpful is like write everything that you can without lying. And
Say more about that.
Oftentimes that means that you're starting at very simple things. Something that I've found in myself and in other early tasters is that they tend to want to find florid descriptors because they see that as like success in being able to experience a coffee. And I think that there's a lot more to be gained from like just getting a foundation of information about how the coffee tastes that might be very simple, but is very clear and is 100% true, right? Or is as true as tasting can be. So, you know, a good example of that would be like sweet. There's sweetness, that's helpful. Now, if you could add on moderate sweetness, moderate to high sweetness, moderate to high sweetness with moderate complexity, like you can kind of keep building off of that, like bricks and a foundation to, you know, be able to accumulate enough information about a coffee to be able to talk about it afterwards. So here it's like, I would say moderate to high sweetness. It's moderate, you know, plus complexity. I'm getting what I would say is round fruit. I'm not getting much citrus, but maybe something like a plum or a cherry. It's clean. It's great.
So at this point, you're not inputting scores.
No. Third pass is when I input scores. I'll sometimes write like my guess of what the score is on the second pass, because I find it helpful when I'm tasting on the third to say, no, that's not right. Like that's not a 7 or that's not a 7.
Okay. What about 2?
Raisiny chocolate, herbal. The herbal is kind of like, I mean, I'd say like it's smooth herbal tea. I mean, you had said chamomile for number 4 previously, and I think that makes a lot of sense. This, I'm also getting something somewhat similar.
Yeah.
There's kind of like a very tart quality in the finish, like a dry tart quality in the finish.
A characteristic of this coffee has been a lemongrass quality.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, medium to medium plus sweetness, moderate, you know, medium complexity. All right, 3. Yeah, round. I'm getting a lot of like date. I get like a little bit of kind of a heavier nut quality in the finish. Not what I would term being vegetal, like a vegetal nut necessarily, but as of right now, like raw almonds kind of nut quality.
And 4.
Yeah, it's really clear. There is a very light kind of stinging citrus quality, like some sort of sweet lemony quality. There's the herbal thing, the herbal qualities of it are the most present for me. Hibiscus, chamomile.
Yeah, very honeyed sweetness to it.
Big honey, yeah. Just like jumping out, not to try to sum it up too early, but I would say in this first pass, 1 and 4 stood out to me as being like coffees that I'm excited to learn more about.
Yeah,
in particular, and that that like level of clarity and just like the space that 4 has in its flavor is really interesting. Like coffees tend to open up as they cool, and 4 feels like one that will taste a lot more intense with 5 or 10 more minutes of sitting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when you're cupping in general, do you use this score sheet?
No, I usually just use a blank sheet of paper. It really, I mean, there are times when, like, I've used the score sheet when the reason why I'm cupping is I want to get as many notes down as possible and have them be as organized as possible. I'm just like trying to train my brain to describe the things that I experience. I find it helpful sometimes to have a score sheet, definitely as an alternative to just how I would normally score, which is just blank sheet of paper and separate it. But also, when I'm writing on a blank sheet of paper, most of this is there. Like I'm always trying to describe the sweetness and the acidity as explicitly as I can. I'm always going through the aromatics, and if I'm tasting it to buy, then it's always going to be a binary of, are we buying this? Like, would I serve this? Is this something that I want to share with a customer or with a friend, or is it not?
Yeah. Beyond tasting, what do you do to evaluate samples?
Oh, I mean, in the past we've done a lot of different things. I think that ultimately tasting is by far the most important thing. We went through a period where we were taking roasted, like, light readings of every coffee, and we were taking extraction readings from the coffees. So we would have a second cup or a third cup, depending on what the setup was, that we would use just to get a TDS reading from, putting it through a small filter and then reading it. And then we had a spreadsheet where we did kind of a comparative extraction number, where it would be that number divided by the average TDS on the table, minus big outliers. And I'd say like that work was interesting, and there was like certain things that would come out of it. And when we were a multi-roaster and we were buying from a lot of different folks, it was a great opportunity to see what qualities we got in the cup, which ones would come through in extraction numbers or in any of the other readings. But like most of the time, it's pretty obvious. Like if a coffee doesn't feel like the roast was done well enough to extract the coffee, like it's probably going to read like that. But yeah, I mean, I'd say like we've done a lot. None of it, has ever been worth anything close to just being in the right mind space, having the right level of focus, and having, and I think like being properly aligned with the reason for why you're cupping. And I, if anything, like we would find circumstances where 90% of our like physical energies were being put towards collecting all of this data when that data sort of did not serve us in any way. And we were ultimately making a binary decision about buy that we might have benefited more from focusing, 90% of our energies on instead of 10%.
Okay, yeah. Should we do the second pass?
Yeah, let's do it.
And would you start to, is this when you would start to pencil in some scores?
Yeah, generally speaking.
Because I'm really, I'm anxious, I'm eager to hear how you do that.
Okay, so. This is great. I think that there's like a stone fruit quality, like a really like light nectarine quality that's coming through here. This is a great example of, this is complex sweetness. I wouldn't say that it's complex sweetness that lingers on the palate necessarily, but I would put it between a 7 and an 8 in the scoring. So yeah, I would say, medium plus sweetness or medium plus complexity, nectarine, plum, right, 7 to 8 or something. Acidity is complementary. It's clear. I don't know if I would be able to define it in any specific, as a specific type of acidity, but it's definitely complex. That's 7 to 8. As far as structure goes, like I'm getting complex fruit character. I'm not getting a whole lot of aromatics. There is I'm not getting any defective qualities. And so this would almost certainly be somewhere between a 6.5 and an 8 in the grand scheme of things. And for me, this tastes like, where it is right now, my general idea of what an 87 or an 87.5 coffee tastes like.
Okay.
If it becomes more complex, then it goes up towards an 88 and towards like being an exceptional, 88 being what I would define as like an exceptional coffee. Like this is exceptional in every way, and that's great.
Okay, that was 1. How about 2?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like this is an interesting coffee because there is a clear, persistent type of sweetness, but it's not fruit, right? It's not like tropical fruit or something showy, and it's that raisiny chocolate quality. I would put the sweetness as somewhere between a 6.5 and a 7.5 and narrow that down. I mean, whether or not, I think sometimes I can like downplay the scoring on coffees that don't have really present, vibrant fruit quality. And that's generally unfair, I think. So I'll probably end up erring on the higher end of that.
And how about in acidity and structure?
I mean, structure 6 to 7. It's clean. I'm not getting a whole lot of other qualities. Like it feels like it's one like persistent flavor. Acidity 6 to 7. It's complementary. There is the presence of acidity, but obviously since it's not a fruit sweetness, or I'm not picking up on a whole lot of fruit sweetness, like there isn't very strong intensity there.
Okay.
I mean, this coffee is probably, for me, I would sort of like guess somewhere between an 86 and 87 or 85.5, 87.5, maybe if you're being a little bit broader.
Yeah. How about 3?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting kind of like a Fuji apple, a little bit of like sparkling, like we call it like malic acidity, maybe maybe tartaric. Both of them are moderate. They're not like super prevalent, but they're very clear. Dates, I'm getting that slightly nutty quality in the finish still. Like I would say that that's something that's persistent, and I would make a note of that in structure.
Yeah.
I think that those qualities tend to be like, I think it's generally really bad to think about like things that are commonly considered defects in a completely binary sense. And I have fallen victim to that in the past. I would not term that a defect, but if I wrote it down and somebody looked over my shoulder, they might.
Sure. Yeah.
That is like, this is in the 85.5 to 86 range for me, 86.5.
Okay, great. And how about 4?
Yeah, there's a lot of intensity. I'm getting more of like a blackberry quality. The hibiscus is still there. This is like the sweetness is syrupy now. That was something that I wasn't getting on the first pass, and I think that's really wonderful. I like that. It's floral, herbal, not herbaceous, herbal, and there's complexity. This is definitely like 7.5 to 8.5 on sweetness, probably 7.5 to 8 on acidity, depending on how the third pass goes and how much that like syrupy blackberry like really sings, or like has this sort of like intensity that's coming from the acidity in the cup. I'm getting a lot of like interesting complex qualities. It verges on being more aromatic, like structure's probably 7 to 8. But if I read something like super strong and aromatic in the last pass, it could go up 8.5.
Charles, what do you do when you are cupping a sample that you really don't like?
That you really don't like?
That you really don't like.
Okay, so something that I think is a good, there's very little professional value to developing a vocabulary around dislike. And I think that it's a kind of like a little bit of a trap that people fall into, because it's easy for people to respond to it. I would say that I have learned the most from trying to imagine why somebody would love it, what sort of home it would have that would make somebody happy, and trying to keep a general like context for where the coffee came from and how much work went into that coffee that I didn't necessarily like. I've been tasting coffee long enough to have things that I was snide about 15 years ago be things that I love today. So like you know, I just,
and the opposite, right?
What's up?
And the opposite too, right?
Oh, that there's things that I loved that I'm not now snide about?
No.
I don't know. I mean,
yeah, no, me neither. Me neither.
Pick up something. I was never, I mean, bear in mind, I came up at in the like aughts at Intelligentsia, where like natural coffees were considered like completely verboten, and there was a, you know, like a whole sort of thing around how terrible naturals were. Obviously everybody softened their stance on there, but I just never had like, my introductions to coffee were always like Wash Yerka Cafes, and I didn't get to have that experience where somebody tastes like a natural and is like, this is the most wonderful, interesting thing, and then have that be a positive for the people around them.
Well, also naturals have gotten so much better. They really have.
So much better.
Yeah. And particularly with regards to naturals from areas that are not traditionally known for producing naturals. Naturals in those areas have considerably improved. So whereas 5 years ago, I would have said, yeah, I have a good natural every decade, I can now say fairly comfortably, I have a good natural regularly, weekly.
So that stuff can get kind of complex because some of the areas that are not known for doing naturals well are not known for doing naturals well because they're a terrible place to do naturals. And people who have a lot of resources can get around the sort of ambient limitations, whereas people who don't might end up committing all this energy to coffees that are below specialty because of defect. And there's like an interesting balance there about, you know, like how are we sort of pushing for, how are farmers being pushed to do naturals even in places where it might not make sense?
Yeah. We're going to have some naturals in our future from a region which normally is not known for naturals, and I'm kind of blown away by the variety. Just having cupped a ton of them, just the different ways that coffee can present itself.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like. I would say there was a time when I was completely anti-natural. I've had some really nice ones. I don't tend to want to drink a whole lot of it. Like a full, I drink a liter of coffee every morning, and I don't think I could drink a whole liter of a natural.
Tumbler of natural.
Yeah, the tumbler of a natural, yeah. But yeah, it's miles away from where it was, and I think it's very cool to have different categories of coffee flavor for people to get excited about that are, you know, representative of different things that the farmer is doing. That's exciting.
Before these are stone cold, can I convince you to finalize your scores for these?
Yeah, let's do third pass. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go 7.5 on sweetness, 7 on acidity. I go 7 on structure. I'd give this a straight 87 or an 87.25. I do quarter points because I'm a waffler.
You're in safe company. Yeah, I mean, I give it a 7.25 on sweetness. There's a lot of it. It's really present. Like this is a coffee that I'd be. Like, it's like funny. This will probably score the lowest or lower than 1 and 4 certainly. But it's interesting how I could imagine uses for this coffee in the final customer experience that are more impactful than the other ones. And it's worth like, that's just like if you can get a coffee that's like this sort of like sweet and raisiny, sort of chocolatey smooth, that's a great thing. So I'd give this an 86, 86, say 86. But I might, like if this was if I had to choose a coffee to buy, I would probably more likely buy number 2 than buy number 1. Oh, wow. Interesting.
2 would feel like there was a clearer place for it. Though it would depend on what the lineup was at any given time.
I see. Okay. What about 3?
Yeah, 6.5 on sweetness, 7 on acidity, 6.25 on structure, or 6 on structure. I'd 85.75 is where I'd be. I think the more I look at the numbers, the more I would probably bump them up a quarter across the board. So 87.5, 86.25, 86, but good.
Okay.
The last one. Yeah, I mean, it's persistent. It's like, there's a lot of honey, there's a lot of blackberry. There's that herbal quality is still the primary focus of it, right? And I think about like, there's like East African coffees that are super like like sort of like light and herbal and have all these different sort of like intricate qualities. And then there's ones that are like heavy and sweet. And this feels a little bit more like the former. Not that I know where from. I'm wrong as much as I'm right on that stuff. I would say this is like somewhere between an 87.5 and an 88. I'd probably say 87.5.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Our scores are very similar. I was 88 on the first, 86 on 2, 87 on 3, and 87.5 on 4.
All right. So the only one where we differed in any meaningful way was 3.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
What did you love about
it? So I think it has a nice fresh berry quality. It's winey. I get raspberry. I get that herbal quality. I also get something hinting at some peach. And then I think what it does is it mixes well with the kind of sugar browning caramel. And I really like when coffees hold both of those things together. I don't think it's necessary, but I like when coffees can hold together that sugar browning and also the fruit, the ripe fruit. Yeah.
I can see all of it.
Do you have any guesses on what these are?
No, I don't want to guess. It'll just be an embarrassing thing. I mean, one could be, I know I just said I'm not going to guess. I'm not going to guess. Tell me.
One is Jaime Ponce. It's a coffee of Typica Mejorado and Caturra. It's grown at about 1450 meters above sea level. His farm is Los Tucanes, and it's from Quito, Ecuador.
Is the Typica Mejorado the one that's like likely a geisha relative? Or am I just imagining this? Or people say that because it's exciting and fun?
I've not heard that, but I mean, I could see the comparison because a true Typica bean often can look elongated, similar to a geisha. But I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Yeah.
This was imported for us by Red Fox Coffee Merchants.
Awesome.
I'm going to ask you any guesses on 2.
No idea. What was it?
Yandaro. It's a coffee from Kayanza, Burundi, by the Yandaro Washing Station. And the elevation, it's almost entirely Bourbon. And it's grown about 1,700 to 1,800 meters above sea level.
That does not surprise me in the sense that like it was more like that kind of like dried fruit quality was way more prevalent than I would expect in like a chocolatey central. But I would say that it's not super common that I taste Burundis that have that amount of like round, full sweetness to them. They tend to be a lot lighter and a lot thinner. In my experience, I haven't tasted, more than 100 Burundis in my life. So that's not a meaningful amount in the grand scheme of things. But that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, Kayanza is the northern part of Burundi that borders with Rwanda, and I've spent a lot of time there, and it's an area that I particularly like. I particularly like the coffee in that northern part of Burundi and the southern part of Rwanda.
Yeah.
3 is a coffee from Suaza in Huila, Colombia, from Mario Salazar. It's a mix of a bunch of varieties: Colombia, Caturra, Castillo, Typica, Pink Bourbon. It's grown on his farm, El Sinaí, at about 1,700 meters above sea level. And that was imported for us by Ocido Coffee. And then 4, I feel like you have a guess for 4.
I mean, I don't. It's either like I would read it as an herbaceous or an herbal Kenya or a really complex Rwanda Burundi. And my guess would probably be a Kenya, but I do not know.
It's a good guess, my friend. This is Cora. It's a mix of SL28, SL34, Batian, and Riru, grown 1,500 to 1,900 meters above sea level by the Kiru Farmers Cooperative Society in Kagu Moyini, Kenya, and imported by Red Fox Coffee Merchants.
That's right. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So if you have questions, if you've already asked them, wonderful. We're gonna bring Scott in here in a second. Please do send questions, and Charles and I will try to get to them.
Mhm.
Let me bring Scott in. Charles, while we're waiting for Scott, I have to ask you, what would you recommend to people who want to improve their cupping skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's what was the most helpful and impactful for me was what I was describing earlier. Just getting into the practice of writing down everything that's true.
While we're waiting for Scott, I have to ask you, now they know that they're 20 seconds in the past. What would you recommend to people who want to?
So the what I would recommend is to get into the practice of writing everything that is true about the coffee, and like really starting from the bottom and working up from there. You know, like defining, like, is it sweet? Defining that sweetness, the intensity of it, and then the nature of it. And you know, very much, I think it's helpful to view the act of cupping as, and like taking notes during a cupping, as preparing yourself to talk about the coffee with somebody else afterwards. It is so much more helpful to have somebody to describe the coffees to, and to hold yourself accountable for having like a coherent idea about that, because like it forces you to do work. Something that I used to ask people to do was to just like write a sentence describing the coffee when you're done cupping it. Like write a sentence saying like that's true about the coffee. That's not just a list of descriptors, right? But is like how you think that this coffee works in a real life coffee experience. And you know, like this is a vibrant, complex East African coffee that I would be excited to show to somebody, to show them what coffee can taste like. You know, this is a round, chocolatey coffee with an incredible amount of sweetness, but not a lot of complexity that I think would make an incredible espresso, or a primary component for an espresso. Like the more that you can kind of build those out, and the more that you hold yourself accountable for putting all of your thoughts into a complete package instead of just a series of tasting notes, I think the more, at least for me, that was something that spurred growth for me.
Who is someone that you would like to cup with?
I mean, I like to cup with all the people that I love to cup with. The person who does the coffee buying for Go Get 'em, Zakia Mason, was somebody that I really enjoyed cupping with, and she's somebody that I traveled with. Somebody I like always respect her palate. It's like when you're cupping with people all the time, you get to a point where you're aligned but you don't agree, and you have a really good vocabulary for what you don't agree on. And when you find that with somebody, or you get to develop that with somebody, like that's awesome. So
yeah,
Z's up there. I mean, I always loved cupping with people, all the like one of the great things about coming up through Intelligentsia is that there were so many people that I got to cup with over the years that are now in, you know, like doing interesting things. They have their own businesses. So there's like a litany of those people that I would just love to be in a cupping room again with. You know, Jeff Watts, Jen Apodaca, Juliet Hahn, people like that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Hello, Scott.
Hey, Ryan and Charles.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, thanks for being here, Charles. You did a great job.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I unfortunately did not get to see the score sheet, but I'm pretty interested to see it now. There were a handful of questions. One person asked in the beginning, asked a question, what is structure? And actually I struggled with that a bit, but Charles answered that. So that was great. Someone is scoring system. Do you have any comments on that?
Forgive me, you cut out for a half second there when you were saying the
Yep.
question.
Yeah, someone asked if you thought that the score sheet.
That's good. Charles, while we're waiting for Scott to return, what's next for you? Are you gonna open a cafe or a roastery in New York?
Yeah, we'll see. That's not completely clear right now. I have a we have another kid on the way, which is pretty exciting. And
Congratulations.
There's a lot of big life things happening, but the dream is always going to be to start another business and open up. And the business that I do is retail. That's what I love.
Is Odessa, is your daughter excited?
Yeah. Oh my Lord, she loves it. She's over the moon being here. It's really fun.
That's great.
I'm sorry if I cut out for a while. I don't know why that's.
You kept cutting out at the exact same moment, which just it was comic.
Okay, so Charles, do you have any comments on whether your score sheet would?
I know what the question is. I know for some reason the internet doesn't want you to ask this question, but I think I know what the question is. Charles, do you have a sense for how your score sheet aligns with other standardized score sheets such as the SCA?
No, I mean, the SCA is going to be way more complex and has a lot more different categories. And I think that that is, so I would say that it probably does not align in any particularly meaningful way. Beyond the fact that they both kind of point towards conceptualizing things into that 100-point coffee cupping scale. That's kind of the shared language among coffee cuppers.
Yeah. The thing that I'll say is, so that, Charles talked how much about how this score sheet is for a purpose. Every cupping should be for a purpose or a goal, whether it's to describe the coffees or to understand what the flavors are in them or how the roast was, or whether or not you want to purchase or serve the coffee. And the other thing is that whether you're using COE or SCA or this proprietary cupping sheet, there's probably going to be issues if an 87 on one is not an 87 on the other, because ultimately it's a way of communicating. These scores are a way of communicating with other professionals who don't have the same goals as you necessarily.
Yeah, 100%. And you don't get extra points for having tasted more or scoring more 90s or scoring more 70s or doing whatever, right? Like you're doing everything for a reason, and that's ultimately the most important thing.
So there was a question about some of these newer popular processing methods, such as the so-called carbonic or anaerobic.
Yeah.
And someone asked if do you find whether these change more dramatically from hot to cold in terms of aroma and flavor? And if so, do you view it as a nice form of complexity or a detraction?
I would say it depends. I think one thing, coffees that become worse when they cool oftentimes just have negative qualities that aren't as apparent. And so I would say that with the anaerobics or carbonic or whatever sort of the larger family should be called, I would say that in the good ones, they've cooled well. And I would read a negative quality coming out as the coffee cools as being something that's a representation of the coffee, a fair representation of the coffee. Certainly if you're tasting something like 40 minutes later or 50 minutes later, that might be a little bit different. But yeah, I think that with the anaerobics, I generally, or whichever, I like it for the most part. I think it's interesting because it represents a more controllable way to sort of increase or change the processing flavor in the coffee. My concerns tend to be a little bit in line with the concerns around the natural, right? Which is, what is the value of developing a what is the ceiling on the value for developing a flavor profile that homogenizes across regions versus investing in telling the story of, you know, the specific flavors of a Huila versus a Nariño or versus a Santa Barbara and Honduras or whatever. Like a natural in all three of those places, and to some extent, you know, like a heavier anaerobic coffee would have maybe less to say about the specific origin. And I think that's something that can, not necessarily, but can work against the goals of, you know, sharing the coffees in the first place.
Yeah, it's just so well put. Thank you.
Okay. Losing Scott.
Scott's gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we were kind of talking before, like I've softened a lot on that over the years. And I think it's I mean, some of it's really cool, but like, okay, in going to Honduras over the last, you know, 6 years or 7 years, right, every year, I've seen the way that people have applied the anaerobic processing. And for some people, it's been huge, right? It's a way for them to create a specific kind of like taste for their coffee that is controllable and doesn't take a lot of money to do, right? It's basically plastic bags. You're keeping it in plastic bags for 24 hours before you do X, Y, and Z. And for other people, I've seen people who switched everything to anaerobic and it makes no difference whatsoever and might even have a slight negative impact. And, you know, maybe that extra work is worth it because somebody will buy it because it's anaerobic. But, you know, Santa Barbara and Honduras is a coffee. Like, these are coffees that have, it has an incredibly distinct and interesting flavor characteristic. And you can't really, like, you can't just like taste it and know that it's from Santa Barbara, Honduras. They're so rare. The really wonderful pocket slots from Honduras. And like that, if there's one thing that I want to share from there, it's that flavor.
Yeah.
And like doing anaerobic or doing natural doesn't really help that.
Hi, Scott. You're muted. Let's have one more question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I had to
no worries.
That connection. Someone asked, what is the commonly associated negative feature of naturals that you know we might not like?
Well, I mean, back in the day, like Ryan was alluding to, like you would just find like taint flavors, like just like kind of like weird, strange, nasty off flavors from just things that should have been sorted out, not being sorted out, or processing that incorporated, you know, mold and other bad things into the coffee. You know, I tend to like, there's like a degree to which the ferment starts to taste like NyQuil to me, that I would say is not a like the farmer did their job, right? The farmer did their job, but I don't like, I would consider that to be a negative. But certainly, like I've you know, sat across the cupping table with people who didn't feel that same way, and I have respect for their views on that. Like as somebody who has never served a lot of naturals, my opinion of naturals is not particularly meaningful because I put my focus as mostly into other things.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's all we have time for. So one note is that we are no longer offering the a la carte coffee after this cupping. If we're planning on getting more coffee, I would encourage you to upgrade to one of our larger sizes. We have one that's twice the size of this and one that's 3 times the size of this and more. And you can find all of that down below. If you already subscribed, you just go ahead and reach out to us at hello@Facsimile, and we can help you get set up with the size of coffee that you want. We have a lot of fun cuppings in store. Charles, where can people find and follow you?
I'm on social media, I guess, at Charles Babinski on any of the social media things. I don't use them that much. So,
but when you do.
But when I do, it'll be at Charles Babinski at whatever the social media is, Instagram, Twitter,
MySpace.
MySpace. Yeah.
Perfect.
Fun.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was so much fun doing this cupping, this score sheet with you and tasting these with you.
Yeah, thank you. I had a blast. I really appreciate it.